70s journey from soul to disco to house music, where like you're like, oh, I see increase, and I feel like Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes is actually like at the key, is like the crux of all of that, because it goes back. Teddy Pendergrass is like doing Otis Redding style stuff a lot, like big soul stuff. But then like the rhythm section is so smooth and they're doing like almost disco. But then like the beat is so precise. You're like, "Oh, I see how this is also house music." It's all there. It's the text, man. It's
But
all there.
what's funny is that I think the reason why I was into it is because I was like really into like West Coast gangster rap. And I think I heard, even though I couldn't recognize it at like 14 years old, I think like I heard like a recognizable connection because like of that like sort of like funk soul sound and like this or something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And it's
yeah.
it's it's also funny cuz that's it's clearly influenced by those Isaac Hayes
Oh yeah,
records.
yeah, true, true.
Except those Isaac Hayes records, which are incredible records, a lot of them, or like two or three of them, like they're not all great, but like there's a couple of those like really big Walk On By, like a couple of those big like insane, like it's like a 12-minute psychedelic guitar solo cover of like a Burt Bacharach song. um but like the thing about them is the vibe is so right, but the rhythm section, it's not that it's not good, it's just that it's not disco. Like it doesn't know it. There's no four on the floor in those Isaac Hayes records, and I'm sure that if Isaac Hayes like had four on the floor technology at his disposal, he would have used it, but he just didn't quite. And that's why I feel like that those Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes records, they just like they're the Rosetta Stone to like this incredible music tradition. I'm obsessed. I'm
Yeah,
obsessed.
they're fucking great for sure. Welcome to Money for Nothing, the podcast about music and capitalism. I'm Saxon Baird with Sam Becker as always, and today we're doing a show that's kind of a what was and what is now. We're gonna do a two-parter. First, we're gonna talk about the passing of Sly Stone and Brian Wilson, and also kind of extrapolate that out on how like these major classic rock and obviously funk like stars are kind of passing and wrapping up, and it's kind of a real end of the era. And then we're going to switch to something extremely contemporary and try
Figure
to
out what the fuck turnstile is.
yeah, basically. um so yeah, let's just start. I mean, obviously there's a lot of crazy things going on in the world, and I think because of that we kind of wanted to do maybe a slightly more celebratory, lighter in some ways show. But obviously, we are both huge fans of the Beach Boys and Sly Stone and the family. And yeah, Sly died this past week, and so did Brian Wilson. And yeah, it just kind of feels like there's like a kind of end of an era coming up as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people, saying this, various really smart music writers, just because they're both such towering figures. And it's funny because they're in retrospect like such an obvious pairing, but like I think before this week, right? Like I don't know if anyone had ever compared Sly Stone and Brian Wilson before,
Mm.
like ever. Like I've read a lot about this, right? Like never. And then once they both passed away, it did kind of funny in this funny way, like
Right.
fit these
Hmm.
careers and these lives and these musical trajectories and gifts, like fit them together in a funny way. And more generally though, I feel like, yeah, like you said, what's crazy about both of these men, um, in a weird way, is that these are not tragic passings.
Right. I see what you're
They're
saying.
they're both men who suffered through tragedy and heartbreak, mental illness, drug addiction, the like the assaults of an uncaring world, all kinds of like terrible shit. And it's unclear in some ways, like neither of these men had like a nice happy bow at the end of their story, you know what I mean? But also like neither of them were, they were both in their 80s, which is not right now like a particularly, that's when the age when people start passing away. These were not young drug casualties, you know what I mean? These weren't middle age, boy, I did a lot of cocaine, heart attacks.
Yeah, I mean,
These were not
they lived a full
like,
life in the end, and they had like really enormously influential. They're enormously influential on
oh
music.
yeah, oh my god. I mean, so I mean, this is the really, yeah, I mean, in such different ways. Though again, like once you put those together, like in both, I think in an era defined by this in many ways, I feel like both like had a miraculous ability to use the studios to expand the sense of possibility in pop music. I mean, clearly, Brian Wilson's like Teenage Symphonies to God. Uh, are you a Brian? Are you a Beach Boys? Are you in the cult of Brian Saxon? I actually don't know this.
My trajectory was like, growing up in California, it like they're kind of everywhere, at least when I was growing up there, and it was I kind of like it was kind of annoying. But and then I was like a punk kid, and I was like, fuck the Beach Boys. But then I actually did an interview with Geneva Jacuzzi one time, if people are aware of that artist, that very performative, very interesting DIY artist out of Los Angeles. And she revealed to me something which I now like realize was so obvious and in front of me, but I never fully realized, which was that the Beach Boys are the saddest music on the planet. And I was like, "Oh, I get it now." So I'm like, I won't say I'm in the cult, but I'm on the fringes of it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean there was that. There, I came to it, I guess, in that like funny, like early 2000s indie moment where like the Beach Boys were
The Shins.
actually the hippest influence to have, right?
Right.
Like the Elephant Six guys were all super into the Beach Boys. Clearly, Animal Collective was.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then I actually like there was like this crusty, like aged hippie, who would once or twice a semester come to my college and like sell CDs in the student center. And he
Mhm.
had a lot of like records and kind of overpriced shit, but he also had a collection of bootlegs that he would sell, like burnt
Well, yeah.
bootlegs on CD. And
Yeah, we got to do an episode on like the death of the
I
bootleg.
know, but he had amazing bootlegs, and they were a little expensive, but they were like, he had like, it was the first time I heard like proper Zeppelin bootlegs. This is before everything was on YouTube, right? Proper Zeppelin
Mhm.
bootlegs. But okay, so they had that. They had like Pink Floyd live stuff. They had like the whole like good like the I don't exactly know, but it was like the last emanation of like classic rock bootleg
Uh-huh.
culture that I've ever experienced. And he also had a version of Smile, which is like the classic lost Brian Wilson album. That's incredible. And what's very weird, so like I bought that, and like somehow like in that like Animal Collective naive psychedelia was like, it was very
Yeah, right.
2008 for me.
Right. And I mean the reason why we're celebrating these two artists, but I think also we're connecting them to like this feeling that like things are these heavy hitters of this era are kind of all slowing down, and it's kind of like coming to a
Yeah, I
close.
mean that's the crazy thing. So Brian kind of had a little bit of a career comeback. Sly didn't. I mean, working with Questlove actually released a movie I haven't gotten a chance to see yet.
Yeah, and he also like played. I remember like Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, like induction and stuff like that. But yeah, he kind of went off the. He didn't. He went out of the spotlight
Yeah,
for a
and he
while.
never, I mean, Brian, yeah, Sly I think had a harder time. It was a harder, yeah.
Hmm.
God, man, there's a riot going on. Uh, we're not just talking about classic albums, but like, goddamn, that is for me top 5, top 10. That
Yeah,
album is
yeah.
so
Wow.
fucking good. Just like, just like decentered mumbling, like the tonal shifts of ugh. Anyway, yeah, no. The point is that these are these like epochal artists, epochal in different ways with massive influence,
Hmm.
like massive influences on everything that comes after. Sly Stone right going on is like the second use of a drum machine ever on a record after
Wow.
your
Yeah.
boy JJ Cale, I think. Uh,
Hell
yeah,
yeah.
outing Saxon is a huge JJ Cale fan.
Fan.
But neither of them had, you know, 80s is when you go. And so there is, yeah, I think there is this question that we wanted to kind of talk about in addition to just like, man, Sly Stone gone, right? But it's trying to think about what the end of the 60s like looks like a little bit. And it's not just these two. I mean, I made like just a brief list kind of just combing through recent news stories even of 60s early 70s, this like classic, the most classic era of classic rock. And yeah, we say like they're still touring and the baby boomers are still coming out, but it really does seem like the final curtain, right? Aerosmith is done touring, I think, because Steven Tyler did like irreparable damage to his voice. Kiss says they're done touring. Of course, they've said that before, but like it does seem like it might actually stick this time. Like they're
Right.
getting too old to do it.
Hmm.
Billy Joel, who was kind of on an endless tour
Right.
at Madison Square
Yeah.
Garden, um, has some sort of like brain condition that um, seems like he's not gonna be able to play live much more, if at all. Elton John, who has been like one of the top grossing touring artists for the last like several years, seems like he's hanging up his spurs. Even my boy Rod, um, supposed to like headline
Rod
Glastonbury
Stewart, to
in
be clear.
oh yeah, Rod Wave. No,
Yeah.
yeah, my boy Rod Wave. No, my boy Rod Stewart. I'm a faces truther, Saxon.
Absolutely. I know full of. I'm fully aware.
Anyway, yeah, supposed to play Glastonbury, is sick, is canceled a bunch of shows. Unclear if he's gonna be able to do it. Ozzy Osbourne kind of clearly on his last legs, doing or just did a final concert. It's even though like that generation of
I mean, the Grateful Dead too. Let's not forget. Like, I mean, they're
well,
kind
they
of.
stopped touring, right? They're doing the Sphere and doing like one-off shows. But yeah, no, I mean Bobby Weir is not getting younger. I mean, he's funny because like
They're kind of like these staples that are like there's always on tour. Your
yeah,
stepfather's favorite bands, and like it's on classic rock, and it's in the Walgreens, and they're always like having these massive concerts, or they're like on TV or whatever. And now it's kind of coming to like an end, and like they really do represent this era of like I don't know, like not only the massive arena rock bands, but also this era of the studio band or artists were like using like analog and like having to like really get these various sounds and tones and experiment, kind of what you were saying about Sly,
yeah,
or like obviously with Brian Wilson, like going back to Pet Sounds and earlier than that, you know. And so it really is interesting, and it feels like it's so different than like what we have now, which might seem like a pretty like obvious clear point, but it really does feel like that these artists were like that. It's a bygone era at this point, and now we're starting to see them like no longer be as present in the sort of popular cultural mainstay that they have been for so
yeah. Well,
long.
I mean, I think that's right. Like the '60s. I mean, the '60s have died and been reborn and died and been reborn like so many times. But like, there were people who could remember it, And there still are, clearly, but the generation of people who made that music, even the best kept, healthiest ones are, they don't last forever, and they're all in their 80s. That's how old they are now. It's kind of like World War II, right? Like when I was a kid, there were lots of people who remembered World War II, but like there will come a time when the last living person who is a World War II veteran passes away. Like that's just gonna
Right.
happen.
Right. Yeah. And I think also what's interesting is that it also represents this era where there was a lot of like different ideas about like what it meant to
Yeah.
be like an artist, a famous artist, musician. There was a different ideology around that, and like also different ways to make money, and like different streams of. I mean, like all the things that we've talked about when we do these more historical
Yeah, no, no,
episodes.
no, totally, and yeah, that experience an earlier moment in the music industry, that are kind of connections to even earlier moments before that, um, yeah, no, so kind of in that spirit, I thought it would be useful to kind of think about this, split this into like two very money for nothing things, right? One is maybe the financial impact, and start to think about like what does it mean if these artists are no longer around. But then yeah, also
Hmm.
maybe also think about that kind of more ideological almost, right? Or symbolic, like the role that these musicians and their like totemic presence has been playing within the discourse, the general, like at the most broadly construed discourse about pop music, that they've been at the center for since, for more than half a
Right.
century.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. And like it's just I mean, you have like this great quote in the notes by Lester Bangs that like we'll never agree on anything the way we agree on Elvis, which I think is like really amazing. And I just think that in contrast to like what we're going to talk about in the second half of like Turnstile and the current state of like music and how everything just feels like so fractured and so like micro genre and like the sort of breaking of the center of like mainstream. I mean, I also read recently that like alt media or alt news media in total makes up like more than like mainstream media now. So it actually like there's
Yeah.
and so just that kind of culture and society that we're living in now, that like it feels so different than these times where there would be like this, like you said, like totemic, like singular rock star, and there was an aura around them, and there was almost like a sort of godlike love for them or obsession with them, or there, and then there was like all the various like markets that would form under them, as well. And I just, yeah, it feels like in such contrast when you just stop a minute and you think about some of these artists, like you think about Billy Joel and you think about Elton John, like.
So I'm not so okay. So there's a couple different things there, right? Like I'm not. I guess maybe my thing is that I think there's a little bit of an apples and oranges thing here, right? Like, because thinking about this, I do thinking about those two different levels. Um, I was sort of surprised. I went back through the last couple years, and then a little bit pre-pandemic, of like the biggest touring acts, and in the top 15, the artists of this era do have like a real presence. Like I think 3 to 4 acts of the top 15 to 20 tended to be like this era of artist, right? Um, with kind of some of them, Elton John, Springsteen, um, who kind of is funny because he has hits in the 70s clearly, but then again in the 80s, like a decade later. Um, but it's pretty, is getting up there himself too. Um, right, but and clearly, figuring out like catalog sales generally are important. But like it was a little bit hard to figure out uh just what percentage of the overall plays these artists contribute to. Clearly, classic rock radio is still really big, but it seemed like maybe a little bit like the industry has been dealing with the slow relative decline of the 60s, the financial potency of the 60s rock star for a while. And I even wonder, whether there's maybe a little, not to get morbid, but in an AI driven era, in
Oh,
a interpolation driven era, in an IP driven era, like whether there's a little bit of a gold mine once some of these artists are no longer around to
wow.
safeguard their legacies in the same way. Like some of them I bet have set up complicated systems and are really on top of it, but others I wouldn't surprise. Like it wouldn't surprise me if it's easier to sample Sly Stone now,
Yeah, interesting.
right? I mean, someone who is kind of famously ornery, um, or you could just imagine. That's not always true. Like, look at the incredible amount of litigation that's emerged around the Prince estate, but maybe there's a little bit more juice to be squeezed out of these lemons. Some of these acts have already been phasing out of touring for a while. They kind of come and go. There's like that new bizarre set of weirdly forever touring people who have somehow like risen to, I think, fill the slots that like the Eagles were in like the 2000s and 2010s. Like, again, every time I look at those touring records, like How Pink is a top 5 tour every single year. Like, I know she does acrobatics, but I do not understand it. Much like I'm generally befuddled by how Pink is still relevant. This is the entirety of my conscious life. Pink is a pop star. No, but kind of turning from those financial impact, I do wonder about like the ideological, or like I was saying, like the totemic role that those folks have played, even just as like cultural, like you were saying, like this figure of the rock star, this kind of auteur from beyond. I mean, now we're maybe in the post-woke era, but an auteur that like was able to behave in different ways before a current set of social expectations were put on them. This is the all your 70s faves are deeply problematic. Looking at you, David Bowie. But I also just wonder about what the passing of the 60s means for our cultural conversation at a level beyond raw records sold or direct influence, right? That Lester Bangs quote I had is from like his obituary for Elvis, right? And yeah, like you said, he says, we'll never agree on anything the way we agree on Elvis. So instead of saying goodbye to him, I'll say goodbye to you. And I do think that there's something to that, Like, I don't know. This generation of 60s artists, I think, are some of the last musical figures that really everyone kind of agrees on. They may not like listen to them, and they may not be relevant, but everyone kind of agrees on them. Or the people that they listen to agree on them. That if you keep tracing the lineage back, you'll find everyone liking Sly Stone in American music. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I don't think that that's true going forward. That
Well, like what's the cutoff? Because it's like
I don't know.
You really think it's like this?
I think
this
it's
era,
not
the
even
60s
into
and
the
70s.
70s. Things had already kind of split. It's that Woodstock monoculture countercultural moment, right? Like culturally, Woodstock wins.
Right.
And so yeah, I think it's even a couple years later. Not everyone likes Black Sabbath. Not everyone that you listen to's favorite artists include Black Sabbath.
But they all include the Beach Boys.
But they all include the Beach Boys. And they all include Sly and the Family Stone.
Yeah.
And so there is this, this sense of partially because of partially because this was a counterculture that won, so like, or won at some levels. So like it was easier to be a dominant force in that world, and then easier to be a big fish in a small pond, and then that pond got really big, but you were still a big fish. You know what I mean?
Right.
But also, and also like their relationship to pop music, that they both, in a way that I don't think everyone's favorite artist, that whole thing, include the Grateful Dead or Jefferson Airplane, but both Sly and the Beach Boys make pop music, like great pop music, and it's really hard to not like everyday people.
Right.
But yeah, so I don't know what it means. And like I said, these agreed upon figures have already receded into the background. I think if you ask a 15-year-old today, some of them might know Sly Stone, but a lot of them wouldn't, right? That was also true, I guess, when I was in high school too.
And they might know Beach Boys or may have heard of it, but they haven't heard of they wouldn't be able to name Brian Wilson probably.
Yeah, probably not. But I do wonder just like what it does to our culture if those figures that we all agree upon just aren't there in the same way.
I think it's maybe interesting if you think about like when that cutoff is, like when things like really begin to change. Does it then mean that like now we don't have like any of those like foundational figures that like we all can agree on? So then it just continues to be more and more post whatever and like fractured as we're kind of seeing today, right? It's like everything has like its own sort of like every genre, every micro genre, every style has its own like through thread to like whatever you specifically and personally find interesting, and there'll just be like endless disagreement.
And there's no universal narrative. It's like it's very postmodern, right? Like we've given up on a universal narrative. There isn't one story that you can tell about modern American music. There's not. There's more than one. There's no more than just. It's not just that there's more than one story you can tell, because there's always an infinite number of stories you could tell. But one story can't even pretend at like. One story can't even pretend at the level of legend to encompass what's happening in American music right now, because there's not one thing happening. And I do think that part of the magic, like literally like symbolic magic of these musicians in the 1960s, is it did feel like they were part of a singular story that could be told, like a master narrative in the words of Hayden White, right? Like of literary theory, like an overarching narrative, and they had a.
But it's interesting because how much of that was actually just like constructed also by the very powerful music industry at the time.
Yeah,
everything, because the media is so much more centralized. The dissemination of information in media is like so much slower than it is now. People's access to that kind of stuff is like much less.
And
radio, even less radio stations.
And this is like I think you're right. A tremendous amount of it. It was always an illusion, right? But there's the question of like, is an illusion that's close enough to the truth that it's useful, or is it so far like it's no longer a tenable statement to make? But I also think there's something kind of poignant about Sly, Stone, and Brian Wilson being the figures we're talking about, because both of them don't fit those narratives. In some ways, both of their lives kind of reveal the way that actual lived experience of individual people with all their foibles and failings and triumphs and tragedies and sadnesses like doesn't fit into any big story. Because like, what do you do with the story of Sly Stone? You know what I mean?
Burned out. So did Brian Wilson.
Burned out, but like refused to apologize. Said he lived the life, at the end of his life, he's like, I lived the life I lived, and like I don't regret it. right? Like that he had this moment in the pop star spotlight, but also had a whole other life beyond that. And like, and their lives don't fit, like Sly Stone's whole life doesn't fit into the narrative of like the Woodstock Nation.
Yeah.
um but that music from that moment does. And so
And
yeah,
it's also like something that like a majority of people that are your favorite musician, as you said, are like will rally like around and like celebrate. And
yeah.
so I think it's also kind of the other aspect of it. Like, is there anyone that like everyone can kind of like rally around, like whether or not they like it or not? And like that you're suggesting that doesn't that like with the loss of these types of artists, and also unfortunately some other artists in the near future, that's kind of like disappearing. Like that now it's just like little camps of rallying around specific, or rather large camps in the case of some artists, but like still like smaller camps of like rallying around, and like they're losing the sort of like connections between those
Yeah,
various
I think
camps.
that's right. And I don't know. I mean, there's two ways of looking at this, I think. Um One is that this is a result of large scale media forces. It's a result of the very specific generational and technological and psychological, like mass psychological dynamics of the 1960s, right? And power, like the children of the worst war the world had ever seen, you know? Like the mid 20th century was fucking wild. um and so like there's just like that they had a very specific configuration, and that everything is going to kind of change after that. Or it's in a more cyclical vision of culture, is you say, well, maybe there was a moment when everyone could agree on things, and then things can kind of break apart. But then also there are moments when things can kind of come back together again. So, could there be a set of cultural conditions in which a new set of figures, whether that be musical, I would imagine actually probably that the role that music as an art form played in the 1960s it's not the only art form that can matter that way. And so it's not like a lock that the next time there's a generational crisis, it will be music that will be clearly the defining art form. um but like you could have another set of figures that emerge. You could have, I mean, maybe the media dynamics really militate against this, but I don't know. I think my sense is more lately, I'd be interested to see if you agree or disagree, is that some of the falling apart, it's not that it's deeper than just like downstream from media analysis, but that there's also like a societal, cultural unraveling. I mean, that's been happening for a while, clearly. and, um,
My God, that's
and
such a heavy
and but
statement.
right, so it's just like we're at a less coherent moment, and that makes it harder to have coherent cultural narratives. And
Which
I
I
could
mean,
imagine,
and then which not to like dive too much into this, but which in turn like makes it kind of harder to have any kind of cohesive political movement as well.
yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, I also,
When we emphasize each other's differences in our very like niche like taste and interests and micro political views, then it obviously becomes a lot harder than all getting together and like smoking some pot and dancing to Jimi Hendrix at Woodstock.
yeah, though I would want to point out that there's brutal cultural battles that we're still like reeling from. Like most of America wasn't dancing at Woodstock. It's just that the hippies won the cultural war in the long run.
Oh yeah, completely, for sure, for sure.
Yeah,
Right. But there was still like a rallying around of that generation. I think what's
yeah,
really interesting is if you talk to people that are my dad's age, it's interesting because my dad is not a fan of Trump, but like a lot of his hippie friends who are still alive are. And it's fine. It's interesting that like they can get together and like play like, I don't know, an old Mamas and Papas record and like smoke a joint. But then like their political views are completely unaligned, but they still have that kind of like anchor that they can kind of rally around, which is like the 60s, And even though that's all, a lot of it was like a fucking myth, or like you said, they won this sort of like cultural battle. it is still this like anchor, even in the imagination, in which like they can have some sort of connection that allows them to look past
Yeah.
like any kind of
Yeah.
like social political differences or interests.
Yeah. And it's not clear that having those narratives, I mean, they're really powerful. They're also clearly really dangerous. I do think that that as we lose these figures, we have to reflect on what they've allowed us, how they've allowed us to continue to talk to each other. And I think to replace them in some ways is to make, without their kind of gravitational pull, continuing those conversations requires some sort of conscious, I would say, like conscious activity. Because they won't be
Yeah,
there
it's
anymore.
interesting. I mean, and I don't mean to keep bringing up politics, but it just seems so prevalent. But it does seem like, for certain circles, like, okay, I just like sat through like the NYC mayoral race, which as of this recording, I don't know the results yet, but like there was a real, yeah, like a huge rallying around everybody I know behind Madani, and like finding figures and finding like cultural moments to kind of rally around that are outside of politics, that are like part of like culture. I think is I think is like inevitably something that does feel like it's missing a bit. But maybe I'm just speaking from my like hyper niche Berlin to Brooklyn bubble. Like I can't like off the top of my head think of anybody. And yeah, well anyways, yeah, it does feel difficult to like to really pinpoint anyone. I mean in this like hyper like post like fractured postmodern, fractured some more postmodern culture.
Well, Saxon, maybe we should go to the break because when we come back, we're going to talk about a band that might just prove you wrong.
Okay, so we're now doing a quick like 20 minutes on the sudden rise or like long coming rise of the hardcore band question mark Turnstile, who in the lead up to like their recent album played like a massive like free show in Baltimore, and we were kind of vibing off the like, oh, this is cool that so many people came out, it was like super DIY, but then we still were like, wait, why is Turnstile getting so big? And we kind of did a little weird deep dive, and I think it actually opens up into like a lot of interesting topics that are actually not so unrelated from the first half of this
It's also,
episode.
yeah. No, I mean, so the thing is like, it's not just Wyman Park Dell is not a
Okay.
concert location.
Yeah.
It's okay, so this is about 2 blocks from where I used to live about a year ago. It's like this beautiful, weird little, pretty big, very deep, like bowl park with kind of woods. There's a homeless encampment. There's Shouty Guy, or there was for many years. God bless you, Shouty Guy. Um, like a classic Baltimore cast of characters.
Right.
That they do this app like a mind-blowingly large number of people. Probably the most people that have ever been in Wyman Park Dell. Just like kids as far as the eye can see for this like free concert with all like donations like to various charitable causes. It was mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Mind-blowing.
And so we were like, wait, why is Turnstile so big? And to be fair, listening to the records did not answer that question. But to give a little background for people who might not know who Turnstile is, they were a hardcore band that formed in Baltimore. They like made a name for themselves with these like crazy, wild, fun hardcore shows, DIY shows, of course. They came out with a couple records on independent labels, and then uh, in I think
2018, I
2018,
think.
2019, or like they basically signed to Roadrunner, which is a subsidiary of Warner, I believe.
Yep.
And basically kind of
But like a classic
yeah,
label for developing, like Sepultura is on Roadrunner, like
right. I mean, it's
um
like yeah, like legit bands are on Roadrunner, but nonetheless, making that leap from
yeah.
the independent DIY hardcore small venue circuit, which they were like only able to play like the literally like biggest venues in that small independent circuit because they were so popular and had so many fans. And they made the jump. They went to the big label. And then of course there's accusations of like selling out, and then they decided to do a remix EP with like an electronic producer. Uh, then they like came out with a new album, and like half of it was like kind of more of traditional hardcore, and it was getting like little bit more melodic and poppy. And anyways, there's all this interesting stuff going on between
Go-go
like
beats. They've got
yeah,
like
go-go
go-go
beats,
beats.
right? Yeah. And anyways, there's also kind of interesting stuff because it's like we're kind of curious like why are they so popular? And then it kind of is interesting because there's this great trajectory from like a truly DIY basement show hardcore band gaining just enormous amount of popularity to like literally getting nominated for like a Grammy, playing in Coachella, signed to like quote unquote a big label, subsidiary of a big label. It's kind of this like old school story that I think as far as like narratives go on Money for Nothing, we kind of felt like, we said like rock as we knew it in like the 90s or before is no longer sans the juggernaut that is Imagine Dragons. Go back and listen to our episode. And so we were just kind of like fascinated by this.
Please do. We're very proud of that
Yeah, that's a
episode.
good one. Yeah, that is good. So, and also involved a lot of listening to Imagine Dragons. So.
From some of us, Saxon.
No, I listened to some of it. You went to like every album, but nonetheless, to like stick with what we were saying, like I think there's like this narrative that we're kind of saying like this isn't a thing anymore. Like there's arena rock, there's all these old school touring bands that we mentioned in the past. First part of this episode, there's Green Day and there's Blink-182, and that's kind of like all we got.
And there's solo acts who are increasingly on the rocky spectrum. But I do think that the solo act versus band is like a fundamentally different orientation. I mean, you can listen to the interview I did with Franz Nikolai from a couple months ago about like the specific dynamics of being in a band, right? Like Olivia or like right, Olivia Rodrigo, that's kind of rock. It is rock. It's rock music, but it's not a band. And it's different.
Right, but it's like with like a team of like songwriters and like
I just think it's
like it's not like being in a band. And that's the thing I think was so interesting about Turnstiles. Like another thing that I'll mention for people who aren't aware is that like guitarist like Brady Ebert was maybe kicked out, maybe like left. It was kind of unsure, but like he was like
officially parting ways.
But he was a major part of that band and their sound when they came up like as a kind of more of a in the underground as like a hardcore sounding band. Their sound now is confusing. There was a song on the new record that sounds like a Sting song, but anyways, we'll talk about that like as well. But I just think it is interesting too. That's an interesting aspect of it too, because it's like you have all these different things. You have like the sort of these weird sort of narratives around genre gatekeeping. You have all these accusations online about like selling out, which I feel like doesn't even exist anymore. So that was kind of confusing. You have the dynamics of being in a band. You have this truly DIY to a quote unquote major label, to playing Coachella, to touring with major acts narrative. And it's kind of interesting because I think that like, tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like our narrative here is that this is kind of something that like for rock bands doesn't really happen anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
and I don't want to overstate like their popularity. Like, I
do think I think it's the funny thing about that, and that was why I think we started talking about this with the Baltimore show, right? It wasn't that like if you look on their numbers, they're tens of millions of song plays on like Spotify, so as a base
I
metric.
mean, yeah, not even that. Yeah.
It depends on from their previous album, but there is this funny thing where like not all plays are the same, not all relationships with music are the same, and that show was like people came from all over the country to Baltimore, which is a city that is the greatest city in America, but is not a city that many Americans are like eager to go to a lot of the time. It right, like it felt like a this is a band with like a real cultural sway. Like you have that many fans that are willing to come. It's like it's easy in a TikTok world to have a song get added to the right algorithms, and not easy, it's very difficult, but it is possible to have a song get added to the right algorithms and rack up huge numbers of plays and not have that kind of dedicated fan base. And that kind of organic community thing at scale felt like more like an old school being a big band than a lot of what we've seen lately.
Right, yeah, and I think that's why we took note. I mean, there was something that I was also kind of thinking in the mentioning of like a Blink-182 or a Green Day, is that it does feel like there is a similar trajectory, and like while like as the narrative that we kind of peddle here is that like it probably never will be on the level that we saw with like say like our Red Hot Chili Peppers, Blink, Green Day, grunge or whatever, but like it's not like there isn't a space there that can't be filled on even a sort of smaller level. Because right now we see like you have like metal bands or you have Imagine Dragons, and that's sort of like indie to bigger label rock band, which I think is probably fair at this point to just call them a rock band and do away with all this nonsense on Reddit about whether or not they're a hardcore band or not. Like, who cares? And they're clearly like a band that was like trying to expand their sound and like wanting to not get stuck into the like micro politics of like hardcore. But anyways, like that we haven't ever really. I feel like there could still be a space for that for those bands.
Yeah, totally. And I would also say that it's another important point is that they're American.
Right.
There is a space for that, and we see it because we have a fairly, sometimes it's a bigger stream, sometimes it's a trickle, but a consistent set of UK bands.
Right.
That are incubated in the UK, right. Get big enough, and then come over here.
Right.
Fontaines DC, right? Which are Irish, so not in the UK. Like, very important to note. But are a European Anglo band.
Yeah.
Anglo meaning English speaking. I'm still being very careful here to not call anyone Irish English.
Or like Idols, which is a UK band as well, and like Rocky plays like big concerts.
yeah. No. Right. There's but the UK has long been able to still produce rock bands, but this is a pretty big American rock band. Boy Genius, I think, counts here too. But that's kind of a super group. It's kind of a different category.
Right, yeah. And like once again, it's not like it's like I guess it is a band, but it's like a band of people who all like made a name for themselves, like, and then got together.
Yeah, as solo songwriters.
Right.
Which is just a
little
bit
like sort of like traditional, like there's a core, there's like people who are like, a band member left, you got filled in with somebody else. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And the interesting thing about this, I think, also is that there is all this media attention, and then there is like the real like seeing the concert in person and people coming from all over the country, like you said. But it is also this interesting thing where there's once again this divide between what we're seeing as far as coverage and the discussion about this band being so big, and then like the actual amount of plays that they get on Spotify, which is interesting to me. And it makes me think, like, obviously, maybe that's also just not a good marker of how many people are actually listening to this stuff also. And also, it also reflects also maybe the scene as well, where maybe those people are, like, listening to this band because they have the record, listen to Bandcamp, whatever.
I mean, I'm very wary of this tendency, and very aware that the media could play into this tendency, which is like, finally a real band, aka like mostly dudes rocking out. You know what I mean? And like Japanese, female fronted bands aren't real bands. Which is not
Right. Well, no, I think, but another one I would think that, like, I think what's interesting about this, maybe it's not to cut you off because I think you probably had this other point, but I will say that I do think the one thing that, like, is a narrative I've seen is that, like, Turnstile kind of has, like, opened up a space for, like, other hardcore rocky bands with a sort of, like, maybe aspirational trajectory, a space to, like, play bigger shows. And like and I don't think the Turnstile is alone in that. I think you could also look at bands like Mannequin Pussy are doing that as well, or like another duty band, but like Knock Loose, or like these other bands that are actually either maybe following, I don't know, Turnstile and the path they're paving, or just at least like doing it together. That there are these like weird like mid-sized DIY to Coachella stage bands that are that I don't know starting, but that are like appearing to be filling this space.
But I also think that another thing with them is a sense of trajectory, right? And like self-conscious trajectory. I went back and like was reading reviews of Turnstile because I was like, when did Turnstile like catch and start getting buzz, And it's like basically from day one.
Yeah.
I mean, it helps that the singer was the drummer in Trapped Under Ice, which are kind of like Baltimore, like beloved Baltimore hardcore scene band that kind of goes on hiatus just as Turnstile is really starting. So they've got a lot of indie buzz. Baltimore is a great scene with like a lot of like Aska punk shows.
Sorry, I misheard you for a second because they were the guy was in Trapped Under Ice.
Yeah.
Okay, you said that.
Yeah, so he was the drummer.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, okay.
I thought I said that.
No, I think you did. Sorry,
that's what I meant to say.
No, okay, yeah.
But right, like this sense of like in a way that I think a lot of bands that is part of the excitement, right? Is that it's this kind of it's heavy, but it's bright in a way that like, look, all the best to Knock Loose. I can't believe that they're as big as they are. But, like, it feels to me like Knocked Loose has a ceiling.
Yeah, right. I see what you're saying.
And in a way that Turnstile might not. Honestly, the band that the trajectory reminds me of most, which is, this is, maybe not a great thing for Turnstile, is Kings of Leon.
Did they start off indie? I don't even know.
Oh my god, dude, Kings of Leon. Really? I loved Kings of Leon. Their first three, so the first album is like a garage punk record. It's incredible. The second one is another garage punk record, but with slightly better production and songwriting.
The first label, this doesn't work. The first label is RCA, bro.
Yeah, I never said they were indie.
Well, no, but that's the whole thing about this conversation, though, is that it's like this true DIY to like major label.
But it was 2001. It was look, they were a bunch of preachers' kids that got signed to a major, like off the back of one single because it was 2001 and everyone wanted the Strokes. And so they had some runway. No, but again, this is a thing. There was a lot. I mean, rock was selling records. You could be kind of a small scale rock band. Anyway, the point being, you can scoff, but you're going to go back, you're going to listen to those early Kings of Leon records, and you're going to be like, damn, Sam, that was a really good band. And every record, the reason I'm saying this is that Kings of Leon, the Strokes, right? Never, I felt like, found like a effective way to expand their sound, particularly. It was like you always wanted to be in a club at the Bowery while listening to the Strokes. They play stadiums, but they never quite figured out a stadium sound. They kind of did later on with like Angles or whatever that album's called. But Kings of Leon, very much vibing like a Southern Strokes, every album figuring out how to make their sound bigger and bigger. Their third album had a couple songs where it kind of had wavy guitar stuff, and I remember listening to it when it first came out and being like, whoa, this album like sounds like it's for a bigger room. And then their next album has Sex on Fire and Use Somebody, and it's like, oh yes, you figured out how to write for stadiums. And it does kind of feel like, and there's an open discussion about whether this new album from Turnstile, about 4 years after the last one, is that same kind of stylistic development, right? Like, is it actually like a bigger feeling, bigger sounding record? But it does feel like there's that same, how do we take this sound, keep elements of it, while figuring out how to make it for a bigger room?
Do you think that this is like a trajectory that like bands will like follow? Because it's interesting. I like we talk about this like like it's just so wild. Because I think like I was watching some funny like YouTube video about like some guy being like, they sold out. They like had this whole plan the whole time to become rock stars, and I'm screaming at the
fuck
laptop,
you,
like,
man! How could you sell out the?
I know. I'm like, what is a rock star now? Like, what the fuck even is that?
They're
like,
gonna own houses in Baltimore, dude. It's bullshit.
Right, if they all don't already, right? It's like, what does that even like? I don't know. Is it even like a path in which like a young rock hardcore band playing in the DIY circuit with a certain modicum of popularity, like even pursue? Like, how much of that space is like available, and like will the label be willing to, I mean, it's interesting, right? It's like, I don't know. Is it just kind of a one off, or is it like a bellwether?
Yeah, I mean, there's been more. It wouldn't be crazy if, along with the Jinko jeans, like rock came back too.
Ooh, big question.
Right?
Mark.
Like, nu metal's back. Nu metal was the last time rock was good.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Name the band. Name the new Evanescence that you're talking about.
Yeah. Spirit Box. Fuck yeah, dude. It sounds like Code Orange meets Evanescence. I'm very much about it. Like, kind of the like, kind of not blast beats, but that like that post-hardcore mutation, metalcore mutation of blast beats, but with like big Evanescence vocals on top. I'm like, it's objectively sick.
But yeah, it's interesting. So it might be that. Yeah, interesting. So guitars are back, maybe, possibly, and Turnstile is the embodiment of it. But what does that even mean in like 2025?
Well, I mean, I know.
What's the ceiling?
So yeah, that's a good question, dude. Because again, let's think about like we were talking about in the first half, where this is now music where there's not a, that your horizon and the world will never coincide, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The fantasy of being the Beatles and being the biggest band in the world is just not there anymore. But also potentially that's like, and especially if you can make like the dollars and cents works, like it's potentially liberatory because you can just be like a big band in your style without it having to make like narrative sense. Like, you don't have to worry about selling out, because like selling out in relation to what mainstream. We're just like exactly. We realize that we could be a hardcore band that you can also sort of dance to, and that's actually an extremely good idea.
Right. But I also like this idea of like freeing yourself from any kind of like major narratives, like kind of the ones we were talking about maybe in like the first half of the show. In the sense that like the pressure of like that like maybe crushed the like mental well-being of someone like Brian Wilson you are free from, because the ceiling and the limit and the interest is just so much lower.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I mean, that can mean that like just grinding constant nonstop touring. Sure. But
And it doesn't mean that like even like that smaller ceiling can't be like come with its own pressures and like that can be taxing on one. But it does seem like in a weird way like this is also kind of the a yeah, there's like I don't know, it's like it's also like a little bit less aspirational in a sense.
Yeah, or it hooks into a different mythos. It lets like you're like I would like to be a big DIY band.
That's what I sounds yeah, exactly. And that's what I found so funny about like these narratives around Turnstile in the sense of like these guys just like want to have like a house. Like which is like I think in today's world is like extremely hard to do as a band
Yeah,
and
I mean,
coming out of a DIY scene. And so if anything it's like let's regardless if you like their music or you whatever don't like their new record, it's like it's something to kind of be celebrated, not necessarily I think.
and if they get people to care, that's sick, right? Like at
Right,
some
exactly.
basic level, having a bunch of people come to Baltimore and care about it, like care about this band, care about each other, donate money for a good cause, like that's sick. I mean, it also I think explains musically a little bit because you look at this group and like I don't think you could play normal like more trad hardcore punk if you can play a free show and get 10,000 people to show up in Wyman Park Dell, like you can't be Black Flag. That's not good music for that many people. That's really bad music for that many people. That's not. You need to be like big and atmospheric and be able to sound like you're playing to a big room. And that's just like what playing in a big room does.
Right. Yeah, and I wouldn't say that their trajectory is nothing necessarily like something that is like opening up for like everyone, and I'm sure it's still like included like a lot of luck and uh you know be in the right place, right time, and all that. But it is I think something to be celebrated, regardless if you like their new Sting Light single.
I love that you're like regardless of whether or not you like them, and in subtext, I don't like.
No, I feel whatever about it, but yeah.
I think
Well,
I think
yeah,
that it's brave to be copying that much Brian Wilson influence in a hardcore band.
and there we go. We'll put a pin in the episode with that. I think that's like a good full circle.
Turnstile, the new Beach Boys. Yes. Al, that is the name of this episode.
Well, thanks for listening to that freewheeling one. Music by Bird Language. Please
We've been
subscribe to
writing
our
them.
Newsletter, moneyfornothing.substack.com.
We've been writing them, dear
We've been writing
listener.
them. You've been writing.
They come. They've been coming out. Tell a friend that if you want somewhat like wild-eyed a
Take some
critical
music industry.
analysis on music and history, Money for Nothing newsletter.
That's what we're here for.
That's what we're here for. It's all we're here for.
So see you either in print or in audio soon. Bye.